Welcome to our latest episode of the Lebanese Physicians Podcast. And today we'll be discussing weaving a life across continents, medicine, humanities, and home with Dr. Nancy Chedid. Dr. Chedid, I knew her from my time at LAU in Lebanon, as she was there at the same time. And she has a very interesting story that spans actually music, humanities, surgery, teaching, writing, and a big reason as to why she moved to Lebanon, which we'll talk about in the podcast. Welcome, Dr. Chedid, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm delighted. And it's especially fun having seen some of your podcasts and know I've had some colleagues and even some former students that you interviewed.
Yeah. There's some people you've worked with actually in Brazil and stuff that we've interviewed before. So, Dr. Chedid, could you tell me a bit about, could you introduce yourself to the audience, just beyond your traditional CV,
Yes.
humanities?
I often tell people that I am adopted Lebanese, but fully adopted. My background is actually Italian American. All of my grandparents came from Southern Italy in the early part of the 20th century. And so that left a pretty big impression on me. But I grew up in a fairly unremarkable situation, a nice suburban area of Long Island, New York. But thinking back, my father was a physician and my mother was a teacher, so maybe there's something there. I had all resources available to me. I loved music, started piano at a very young age. When I went to school, I loved biology. And I thought I could always do both and whatever else came along. And in a way, I feel as if I never quite grew up that way. In a way, I remained a child that I always wanted to do everything. When I got to the end of high school, I said, I'm going to college. I guess I have to pick a major and I have to decide what direction I'm going in. And so I chose music. But after a few months, that wasn't working out. So I started taking the bio and chemistry courses and became a music pre-med, which I think now is not that unusual, but at the time was.
Yeah, I'm sure it was very unusual at the time. And you still play music till now. You still play all the time.
Oh, yes.
Concerts.
Yes.
We'll talk about that later on,
Yeah.
I think, today. But Nancy, you trained at some of the world's most prestigious institutions like Yale, Hopkins, NYU, Harvard. How did those experiences shape your identity as both a physician and an artist?
Yeah, so it's quite a journey. And thank you for the opportunity to look back at it, because you don't usually look at it that way. You look at it in pieces. But as I said, I had wanted to do music, but then I found out I was able to fit in the medical courses. And I think at that time, things weren't as competitive as they used to be. I always remark on the fact that I managed to get into Yale, but I also had an opportunity at the time to go to Harvard. And I looked at the programs and I said, Yale has the best music department. And so I wasn't losing anything. I got to go to an excellent school and also pursue music. And then going to medical school, to this day, I believe that being a music major helped me get into Johns Hopkins. As I later found out, they were really pushing to have a more diverse student population at the time. And when I interviewed, it was a really simpatico with the person who interviewed me, who had an artistic background. And, it's amazing. Now I feel as if the world just opened up. It was like a carpet of roses I was walking across, and all these things happened. When I began medical school, just at that time, Johns Hopkins they became affiliated with a music conservatory in Baltimore, the Peabody Institute, and now they are one institution. So there was a Peabody Johns Hopkins chorus, and the same conductor conducted the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. So I got to be in that chorus. There are all these artistic events that were happening. And then when I did my surgical residency in Boston, at some point, the end of the day, operating all day, in my scrubs, I went to the surgeon's lounge and I saw a Boston Globe newspaper, and there was a little ad in the bottom. They needed additional singers for this fantastic production of the Verdi Requiem with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. And I said, I wish I could do that. And then I saw that the auditions were that night. So it was now or never. I think if I thought about it too long, I wouldn't have done it. But I ended up singing with the the Boston Symphony Orchestra in their chorus. I managed to do it for about a year, sneaking in and out of the hospital, but then it became a little too much. But I'm really glad I did it, and it was very memorable.
Yeah, and that was the time when there were no work hour rules, right? Like it was like you do your
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, we would sometimes go in Saturday morning to the hospital, come out Monday night, like
yeah, that doesn't happen anymore.
60-hour shifts.
I tell people that's the importance of also for all like residents and students. It's the importance of like having other hobbies and stuff like that because you don't want to get burned out. And as long as you're doing other things outside of medicine,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
always a good avenue for you to go.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I think I'm doing too much, but it's more energizing than draining. But also in my training, of course, the biology and the medical side were very, very important. And I'm just really grateful for mentors that I had. And one stands out in particular when I was training in hand surgery. He was one of the greatest hand surgeons in the world. And if anybody knows, he was one of the proteges of William Littler, who was the father of modern hand surgery in New York City. And he was so kind. He would just, at lunchtime, he had this big building, office building. He would just stop everything, make everyone take a break, and he would keep working. And in the OR, he would stop at 1:00, no matter what we were doing, tell me to unscrub and slap a $20 bill in my hand so I would have lunch. And these small things, they really stay with you. And when that happens to you, you feel like you should do that too. It was so nice to me. I've got to pass it on to the next guys.
Right, exactly. That's the importance of mentorship. So we're gonna get. I mean, we didn't tell the audience, but you're a surgeon in practice, and you were a practicing surgeon
Right.
in the U.S. for a long time, but then you moved to Lebanon.
Mhm.
And can you just tell us like what were the personal circumstances and turning points that led you to leave the U.S. and
Yeah.
build a new life in Lebanon? It's not very common, I think, that a U.S. born surgeon ends up moving to practice in Lebanon.
Yes, and it was a pretty serious and kind of looking back, kind of dramatic thing, but it was really, really a labor of love. I was in Boston as a surgery resident, and I met my late husband, who was an immigrant from Lebanon via Algeria, and he had to leave Lebanon during the civil war there. He was a graduate student in engineering and later became a professor of engineering in Boston. And as soon as I met him, it was a real awakening. It was cognitive dissonance. I thought I was educated and well-read and I knew about different parts of the world. And then I found out that I didn't really know anything about the Middle East and certainly not Lebanon. And it was a real wake-up call. Now I look at everything with a different lens and different perspective because of that. But I knew within a week of knowing my then boyfriend that he wanted to go back to Lebanon, and that if things calmed down and his whole family, which were scattered, some in Lebanon, some in Europe, some in the US, that he wanted to go back. And that became our mutual dream. It was very fortunate. I got to know him and got to know a bit of the language and got to know the Arab American community. And we had 3 sons, blessed with 3 sons. And it was never quite the right time to move. How are you going to stop your career, your education, your whatever, to pick up and move? And so it was not the reason that we wanted it to happen. But what happened, my husband became very ill, had an aggressive bone marrow cancer, and he passed away 13 years ago. So, but we didn't even have to talk about it. I knew that what was to happen was I would pick up the boys and we would move to Lebanon to be with his extended family. And so that was the move.
So that's a big, that was a big decision that you made at the time with the boys. Yeah. And then you moved, you packed and moved. So you left your career, right, as a hand surgeon. Right. It's a pretty flourishing and academic career in the US and moved to Lebanon. How did this move affect your career trajectory?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. It was a big change. And when I first went, I was looking around for surgical practice, and it was interesting. I had been a reconstructive plastic surgeon and a hand surgeon. And one of the things I did was I was the reconstructive surgeon for the diabetic foot clinic at the Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital. That was one of the things I did. And with hand, it was everything, trauma, infections, arthritis. And when I arrived at Lebanon, well, not uniformly, but a lot of people thought, oh, plastic surgeon, you're going to inject Botox. And that wasn't really what I wanted to do. But right about that time, while I was exploring, we first lived in Jbeil, in Byblos, Lebanon, where one of the campuses of LEU is. And until I figured out what I was going to be doing, I was writing, which we talk about later in my memoir, but I also walked and walked all around the city. And there was this big hole in the ground in the middle of the LEU campus, which shortly after became the new medical school building of Lebanese American University. And not long after that, I was introduced to the administration, and it just felt like a wonderful fit. They wanted someone to teach and take on some of the administrative work. And I was a widow in a new country with young children. And so I moved more and more towards a purely academic and didactic setting.
Afterwards, yes, you moved from basically hand and reconstructive surgery toward like teaching, writing, mentorship for the most part.
Right. But there was, again, the interweaving, there was some connection there. One of the things they needed the teacher for was anatomy. And that was a lot of fun and wonderful fit. And we had such great people working with, and I really enjoyed that, teaching the anatomy. And I got to continue teaching surgical skills to the medical students. And I gave lectures on hand surgery to the orthopedic residents. So there was a lot of sort of a continuity I was able to maintain.
Yeah, what's interesting, I think I've made big moves, but not as big as you, obviously, but I moved back to Lebanon too, and I made that decision at one point with the kids. And so as I tell people, like, change is always, it's always hard, but maybe it's good because you always learn new things when you do this, and you never know where life will lead you afterwards.
Absolutely. I had some people's, give me the typical, you're moving where? You're moving to Lebanon, and because it was a dream of your husband. Well, yeah, so for me, it's like, if you look at the other side, how could I not do that? It's unthinkable. It was an idea that we had together. And fortunately, my sons, they were between the ages of 10 and 14 when we moved. So they were old enough to understand, they didn't have a false vision of what was going to happen. And also we had visited Lebanon. The grandparents had been to the US. They were very close. They were totally invested in it. And thank goodness my husband had spoken to them since the days they were born, 100% in Arabic. And I spoke to them 100% in English. So people ask us, how did you do that? It was so easy because the kids just learn languages like that. And if you start from when they're born, they don't even feel it. They have two primary languages. And
Right.
They were very invested in the culture as well. So.
Exactly. So they were able to adapt very well to the move. And then when you were there, you were right, as you said, you were writing at the time, and you were you ended up writing a memoir called Snow on the Barbecue, which illustrates everyday life in Lebanon. What moments from that period sit closest to your heart?
Yeah. So it started out, as I said, writing little scenes of my first year there once a month, sending them back to friends in the US. And then they started to say, hey, why don't you put this together in a memoir? And it was called Snow on the Barbecue and Other Wonders of Everyday Life in Lebanon. Because, the classic, snow in the mountains, the sand on the beach. And the title came from one winter, we wanted to go to the summer house, but the summer house was inaccessible. It was at around 2,000 meters elevation, and the roads were snowbound. So we went on snowshoes from the Tenderine Cedars Reserve to the summer house. And there were two portions of the house, and in between a brick grill, a barbecue, and it was covered with snow. So my son immediately went up behind the house on the snowshoes and skied down the snow over the barbecue. So that was one scene. But, the stunning beauty of Lebanon and the diversity of the landscape. And I remember once walking on the beach in Chedid in December, and looking up, and there was the snow on Mount Sanin. I mean, if the first time you see that, bowls you over.
Right.
But there was also an episode, like kids were taking music lessons. There was a small music store in Chedid where they taught lessons. And one night there was this horrible storm, snow in the mountains, tons of rain, flooding. But we managed to get there for the music lesson. And the teacher, who was the owner of the store, said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't take him downstairs to teach because none of my employees are here because of the storm, and I can't watch the store." But then he looked at me and my older son, and he said, "How would you like to watch the store for me?" So that's what we did. And we played all the pianos and the ouds and the durekis, and we sold some instruments, and we had the best time. And my son said to me, "Mom, do you think that it could have happened in the US?" I said, "No, I don't think it could have happened anywhere except here."
Like there's a lot of stories that happen in Lebanon that don't happen in the US. But yeah, I don't think anybody in the US would have left you alone in the store to try their instruments.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's similar to one story which we had once. We were like up in Farah running like the 5K up there with my daughter, and then
Oh, yeah.
my wife forgot the keys in the car. And then we asked like some of the Nakhal people were like, "Who's gonna open the car for us? We have everything in there." Like, "Yeah, just call Abu Tony. He'll come over from Beirut and open it for you." And that's what
Yeah.
he brought the
Yes.
family, came over, opened the car, and he's like, "All right, I'll go for lunch now. Thank you very much."
Right. Right. It's the best thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, then you joined LAU at the time after you were introduced to them, and you did the first lecture was on music and medicine. How did that lead you to joining LAU and shaping the medical school's culture?
Yeah. So I actually had just been appointed. I had initially for a part-time appointment, and partly to teach anatomy and facilitate PBLs and help with the administration. But I was wandering around the lovely campus, and I saw a sign on the door said music, and I wandered into Zef Khalifi's office. And I noticed that these flyers and posters about a lecture series. And there were a number of lectures, and it was music or music plus, like music and engineering or music. And he said, "Hey, you want to give the lecture of music and medicine?" So that sounded very exciting. And I already knew something about it, but also I got to do some research before the lecture, which was great. And that led to a whole series of other events following that particular lecture. So I had already been sort of signed up to teach the anatomy and so on, and I did. But later on, I was invited to give other talks. The LAU Student Neuroscience Club, that was a lot of fun, talking about music and neuroscience. And there are just so many relationships between music and science and medicine, and now music therapy, which is like a standard treatment for strokes. People who have strokes and they can't speak, a lot of them can sing. And so they learn to speak again through the singing, because the music just involves so many parts of the brain, So yeah, it's fascinating.
Right. And even not only that, also like ICU patients who are on artificial respirators and stuff like that, also music has a role in the rooms.
Ah, wow.
Yeah, to help with their delirium and stuff like that. So
Amazing.
So you were at LAU, you had a very wide range of roles, like you were anatomy, as you said, surgical skills, student affairs, wellness, recruitment, alumni relations, international partnerships. Which roles transformed you the most?
In teaching, as I said, anatomy was great fun. It was intense. We had to, even we as teachers had to study up before the lectures because there's so many details to know. And the problem-based learning sessions actually were wonderful because we have to explore a whole wide range of topics in medicine. And one of the reasons I wanted to do academic medicine or surgery is that I could keep up with things. I was afraid I would be too lazy if I was out in private practice and I wouldn't read up on anything. But if you're teaching students, you got to really know what's happening, what's current. And that was very valuable, in real life, in regular life. But a lot of the things that you mentioned, the recruitment, the international affiliations, the wellness, were under the auspices of student affairs. And really, I was so fortunate that the dean and then president at the time, Dr. Mawad, and the current dean, Dr. Sola Bahous, who basically, the expression in English, they gave me the ball and let me run with it. So they had student affairs, but it wasn't a consolidated office before I had, the position of director. And then we had all these different aspects to it under that auspices. And one of the best things was working with all the different departments and different people in LAU, like the dean of students of LAU Biblos campus, the head of the recruitment office. And we had all these working groups and subcommittees, the wellness with our stellar psychiatry department. The wellness aspect was really wonderful because I think I'm an incurable mentor. I just find myself mentoring and advising people, but now I could do it in a big way, an informal way. Like we would meet the director of student affairs sessions just for fun, at lunchtime. And Dr. Sanemi of psychiatry, he would have outdoor classes sometimes and just wellness sessions for the students to have fun. And the students were just so excited about it. They were so appreciative. It was just really nice to see. But there's one story I wanted to tell, and it wasn't exactly under the job description of student affairs, but again, the dean let me run with that, was the international affiliations. And I had been invited to speak by a student about plastic surgery, and sort of a career orientation thing. There was another speaker, and he had been my student years before. And he knew that I was a plastic surgeon, and he was interested and would ask for my advice. We'd just stop on the stairway and talk. And I wrote some recommendations for him. And he ended up at the University of Sao Paulo. That was in Brazil. That was several years ago. And he's now, an attending surgeon, a real star. And he also founded a journal, which has really benefited a lot of our students who are able to be on the staff. So one day I asked him, do you think that anybody at Sao Paulo might be interested in affiliating with? And to my total shock, he said, yes. He said the chancellor or the dean had grandparents from Lebanon, and he was always looking to find a way to affiliate. And that was just one of my happiest and most memorable experiences. Eventually, I was invited to speak there. I was involved with their faculty in the Association of Academic Health Centers International, which is now affiliated with the Association of American Medical Colleges. And the people there are my dear friends. And since then, I was happy to find out that they have continued that affiliation, and we have exchanges of our students and residents, and they're expanding the program in medical education. So it's wonderful.
Nice. Yeah, and that's the importance, I think, of like mentoring students, is you have students to go do other things elsewhere, get more prominent, and then they know you, and then you are able to connect with them and create these affiliations afterwards.
Yeah, it's like ripples in a pond, and the students themselves then help their institution and help other students coming after them.
So I'm going to ask you this because I'm sure when you were a surgeon in the U.S., you mentored students in the U.S. What did you learn from mentoring students in Lebanon, academically, emotionally, culturally, and was there a difference between that and mentoring students in the U.S., I guess?
Yeah, I mean, in the U.S., of course, in the places where I was, where we were all really lucky. It's whether it's merits this or not. I mean, if you enter one of these institutions that has a reputation, then you have a much better chance of getting on in the next step also to one of these institutions. And not to say that the folks here weren't working really, really hard and they deserve to be there. And at the time when I started out here in surgery, there were very few women in surgery, like hardly any. So we had a lot of hurdles to overcome. And now there are more. But I remember specific women that I mentored with regard to surgery. And in fact, I founded the first women's networking and support group for surgeons in Boston. But in Lebanon, what strikes me, how hard the students were working. And first of all, what an excellent background they had in their secondary education and how very well qualified they were. And so, I didn't think about that beforehand, but coming from the US, coming from the American system, naturally, a lot of these students would ask me for advice to see if there was some way I could help them. And what was also interesting is that you would be surprised to hear, but I consider myself basically a shy kind of person. And even after having been a musical performer and a teacher, I always have to overcome that and break through the wall. And I had colleagues in the US that I maybe hadn't talked to for a decade, and I would have been really shy to ask them for help for myself. But once the student needed the help, I was on the phone, I mean, it was interesting. It was for them, I could do it, I could get over my reticence. And of course, that was wonderful because then I reconnected with people. And even if it's the 20th person you call, you make a connection and then they connect you with someone else and then becomes this network. And so that was really great. But yes, the students, they really worked hard. A lot of them came from modest backgrounds. A lot of them had, we had to help them with making sure they got whatever aid that were due to them. They were financially difficult situations. And yeah, so just a really hardworking bunch. And of course, you see when they get somewhere else, when they go to Europe, when they go into the US, how they almost uniformly succeed magnificently. And you may have noticed yourself, like you look on a LinkedIn at our graduates, and they're always getting the resident awards and, really being recognized for that.
Right. A lot of the students or residents I worked with have gone to do a lot of good things here in the US or in Europe, actually. And I think part of it too is you always have to fight to get
Yes,
where you want to be. And this attitude continues, I think.
that's right. And we know, I mean, the statistics are out there that they are better qualified on average than the US graduates. They have to be to get accepted.
Exactly. They have to perform extra better to be able to make it.
Mhm.
And saying that, I think what we were talking about with this, we're talking about the students and the mentoring is the emotional aspect of medicine. And everybody talks now about emotional intelligence or EI, and everybody talks about burnout and stuff like that. And you were involved, like you helped create the humanities in medicine thread and
Yeah.
interdisciplinary creative writing workshops.
Mhm.
And so why do you believe like medicine needs the humanities today more than ever?
Yeah. And it's interesting, again, because I was lucky to have the occasion to give all these talks and talk about this and then doing some research on it. And the whole idea of humanities in medicine started in the US in the 1960s, actually. And then it gradually became more accepted and more formalized. And even the AAMC now has a formal program called FRAMI that they circulate the program and recommendations. And next door here, Harvard has a big program in humanities. And there's this wonderful doctor, Dr. Lisa Wong, it's a pediatrician at Harvard, and she wrote a book about the Doctor's Orchestra, the Longwood Symphony. And I used it as a resource for my lectures. Of course, once I came here, I got to meet her. So we're good buddies, and I get to go to her orchestra performances. But she talked a lot about that. And there's been research done on, why do you see so many doctors that are musicians or musicians that are doctors? And they've looked at musicians' brains and, like the connection between the hemispheres is stronger and things like that. But they both medicine and music, particularly in a group, in an orchestra or a chorus, it requires a certain amount of calmness while being alert. So like this equanimitas, but being ready for whatever's going to come, the downbeat of the conductor or the emergency in the emergency room. And of course, you're part of a greater whole, and you have to really have a quick mind. So there are some common traits. But the way I look at humanities, there are things that benefit people in general, the people that you take care of, and there are things that benefit the individual, the doctor. It's been known for as long as there are humans that the music has emotional benefits. It's almost like a meditation. It helps calm the mind. And recently there was an article about how singing has health benefits. If you think about it, the rhythmic breathing, it stimulates the vagus nerve, it makes you feel a little more calm. And to me, also, when you learn about the arts, the humanities, literature, it's for me personally, learning about a lot of different things, eventually you find that they connect some way. Like your brain needs hooks to learn something new. And it also is a way to connect to other people in other specialties. So I feel lucky to have been in different fields, and it almost feels like I feel like I see things sometimes in a different light or brighter with more color. And everything seems interesting to me, and I always want to learn more. Of course, the other part of humanities is the humanitarian side. And some people think that if you're an artist or a musician or a painter, you can get more in touch with your own emotions, and you can be calmer and have more perspective. And that helps you relate to the patients, which of course is the ultimate goal. And the field of narrative medicine, some of this has been done at LEU, where the students are given the time, to go sit with the patient and find out everything about them that is not medical. And of course, the other side of what's going on with patients, their life at home, their circumstances, is often really what determines how well they do with their disease.
Right. It determines how well they do with their disease. It also may determine why they have their disease. I mean, sometimes
Yeah,
their chief complaints may be related to what's happening at home.
right. Mm-hmm.
So then you did all these things in Lebanon, and then of course, like 2019 hit. I was there at the time too, and then COVID, the economic crisis, and finally there was a Beirut port explosion. And that was a big thing that happened in Beirut. And for anybody who witnessed it, it was a very big event that affected a lot of us. But then you wrote your essay, Sickness of Separation. So can you share how the Beirut port explosion experience reframed your understanding of home and displacement?
Yeah. I mean, it affected so many people, and many of us are blessed not to have been injured or to have someone pass away that we know. So, again, really, my heart goes out to all them. But it did affect us in a dramatic way. My youngest son, previous to that, he had just graduated from high school. And with all that was happening with economic crisis and some people leaving Lebanon, and he took a really, really hard look at what his best opportunities would be for education, and he wanted to be a biomedical engineer. So he was the youngest, but the first of our family to leave Lebanon to go to the U.S., always with the thought that he would want to come back. But he took off, so we dropped him off at the airport, and his plane took off at 8 a.m. on August 4th, 2020. So when the explosion took place that evening, his plane was over the Atlantic. And of course, you can imagine, none of us knew what was going to happen. We were worried about how he would feel, would be worried about us, and he was worried about us and how we would feel. Yeah, that was very tough. And besides, already, the blow for me was, my youngest son was going to be across the ocean all by himself. There was this. And so, yeah, we all there went through a lot. And yes, I started to look around and think. And, when we went to Lebanon, when the boys were young, that was supposed to be, forever. That was the move, the permanent move. No one could foresee what was going to happen. And I thought, well, it's possible that my other sons might leave as well. And one by one they did. My oldest graduated from our medical school, was very proud. And then he did a postdoc and ended up doing a residency here and in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is why I'm here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And then the other brother also found a position in engineering. So I didn't really have immediate plans to go back to the US, but at that time. But of course, I started to think, and I started to look at the house we had built. That was my husband's dream, that we would be next to his younger brother and next to his older brother in that one place. That, what does that physical space mean? Was I going to have to leave it? What does home mean? Yeah, really made you think.
Yeah, so you were thinking at that time, and so what eventually made you decide it was time? I mean, I know part of the reason is your kids moving to the US. But what was the
Mhm.
final like straw that led you to decide it was time to repatriate back to the US?
Yeah, and the word decision is interesting because a lot of people ask me, like they'll see me and they say, "Oh, so you decided?" I'm like, well, no, I'm like, I didn't decide that like I'm no longer Lebanese and I'm just 100% American. But the circumstances, I think of it in two or three aspects. One is, where is my immediate family? And we do have extended family in Lebanon that we're very close to, and the cousins to my kids are like siblings. But with all three of my sons somewhere else, and then me being again a widow and an immigrant, and then it being what Lebanon is never quite stable because of where it is, but it was more unstable suddenly in 2023. So I think if any two of those were not in place, I might have stayed. I was planning to stay, but when all three weren't working for me, it was actually my sons that suggested. They said, "Do you want to come stay with us? And then until we see how things are going to go." And that was very hard. And it looked at that moment like things were ratcheting up. And I was supposed to go from Lebanon to the US for Thanksgiving. And all of a sudden, I didn't know if I was going to be able to come for Thanksgiving or in the foreseeable future. So within about 48 hours, I made a decision. But I was hoping to be able to go back, and I continued as many of my duties as I could virtually. But then, it eventually became clear that someone else going to have to take the reins. And yeah, so that's how it happened.
Yeah, exactly. People don't know, like in Lebanon, there's one major airport in Beirut, and if there's a war
That's right.
or the airport closes down, then there's basically no way out because
That's right. And that's what we remembered in 2006. We were in the US and we were planning this wonderful summer visit with the kids. And then 2 days before the planned trip, guess what? The airport was bombed. So yeah, we all have that sort of traumatic memory.
Exactly. And so what has been the hardest part of transitioning back to the US after building such deep roots? And
Yeah, I
it's always
mean,
hard. I mean, it's always hard to change, right? It's always hard
right,
to do it.
right, of course, and that was home, and there's the small things, people are so warm, the family's so strong. I mean, just going every morning to have coffee with my sister-in-law, I really miss that. That's sort of emblematic of it. I really miss that routine, all the relatives. And of course, my community at LAU, the faculty, such wonderful people, such a nice community, what we were building together, and the students, that was really hard. So it was, and coming to Boston, we all, having visited not that often, but a few times since I had been in Lebanon, first thing the plane is landing, and you're like, it's so flat. Where are the mountains? Where's the beautiful landscape? That you gradually kind of get used to that. And then, I grew up here, so I understand, but there's a different manner, the way people interact with each other. I wouldn't exactly say cold, but reserved. People have their space. They're a little more formal, a little bit afraid of invading each other's space. And I know that really annoyed my sons and me a little bit. But then you start to learn, oh, they're no better or worse than other people. This is just the culture, and it's the manner and how they behave. And if we talk about the good side,
Right, exactly.
I feel incredibly lucky. I have to realize that I have a different perspective now, having been in the U.S., and Lebanon and U.S., is that maybe that where you live, maybe that's not going to be permanent, and my children, they're at a still early stage in their training or career, and could be next year, some of them will move somewhere else. But right now, we're here so my son will be close to the hospital where he's training. And how lucky. I mean, what a wonderful place, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Boston is, if not unique, one of the most special places in the world for the concentration of academic institutions. And it's people from all over the world, and it's fascinating, and there's so much to do. So, and interesting people, so we're really, really lucky that way. Yeah.
Like exactly. And I think it's like you said, I think there's no permanence to anything. Like you always have to take it year by year, day by day. And I always tell people, like, you think 2 or 3 years ahead, don't think 15,
Right.
because you never know what's going to happen.
Right. Right. I mean, you make a reasonable plan and then you see,
Exactly.
count on like the next hour, maybe what's going to happen.
So now you're describing this stage of your life as like weaving a tapestry or tapestry. What threads are you currently weaving? Like teaching, music, writing, community work?
Right.
I know you told me before we started the podcast, you said you had a very busy week this week. I'm sure you're doing a lot of things right now, but what are you
Right.
weaving?
Yeah. So, and as we were saying, it's, maybe there were a couple of too many things this week, but for the most part, they're fun and they're energizing rather than exhausting. You don't want to do too much and push it over the edge into exhausting. But yes, when I came, I was thinking, what am I going to do? And I look around for a lot of opportunities. And there are some things that I'm still looking at, but they haven't settled. For example, so interesting, there are music conservatories here that have music therapy programs that sometimes need anatomy teachers. And I thought, wow, that would be a really great opportunity. I'll keep looking. They didn't have openings right now. And I'm teaching, but I thought it might be a good idea while I was figuring out what I was going to do to be certified and have a diploma in English as a second language. Because after all, I'm a teacher and I'm a writer, and there's so many people from different parts of the world. So that's been fun. I've been doing some of that. And in fact, there are a lot of foreign doctors that come from other countries. So I have a little bit of a niche is medical English. So that's been interesting.
Yeah.
The musical opportunities, music is everywhere. I mean, you just have to, be careful that you don't take too much. I'll give you an example of how the things get woven. Like just as I had been walking around Jbeil when I arrived, I just started walking around Cambridge. And it's so historic. And everywhere there's a little sign you can read about, George Washington, the first president, stood here, and, this happened. And there is a beautiful old church a few blocks from here that the building was built in the 1800s, but the congregation of the church started at the same time as and along with Harvard in the 1630s. So that's how old the congregation is. And they're very, one of the things that was gratifying here, people educated, and I don't mean just they have a high degree, but they think and they read and they, as much as they can, they try to help and make things better. So, active in social causes, more understanding from American people in this neighborhood at this time than I ever had about if they know a lot about the Middle East. And if they don't, they ask me, about it. So there was a sign outside that church that said the Friday Cafe. I said, okay, what's that? So what it is, a bunch of volunteers cook food and serve it to unhoused people, to homeless people once a week. And I just kept looking at that. Finally, I just walked in, and it is the most beautiful and humbling and wonderful experience every week to do this, working, the guests, the homeless people, and also the volunteers. What a group. My schedule is too busy now for me to do that, but the people there told me about, they said, oh, you're a musician? You got to join the choir. So, and this isn't just any choir. I mean, everyone is a very well-trained musician. The director is a world-famous organist right down the street.
Yes.
So, and then the volunteers at the Friday Cafe told me about some teaching opportunities. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I mean, even without sort of looking for it, there are all these opportunities.
Right. It's more like you start meeting people and they know other people and they connect you with them. So it makes it easy, or makes it easy to find other opportunities in that case.
Yeah.
So now you're writing a children's book which touches on displacement. When is it coming out, and what message do you hope younger readers, especially in the Arab diaspora, will take away from this book?
Yeah. So this book, it's been written, it was finished a while ago, and I've been doing legwork for the last year, showing it to publishers, showing it to other writers, getting tips, revising. But, I'm finding out that this is a whole job unto itself, getting published. And so I'm going to book fairs and things and talking to authors. And do you go the self-publishing route, which is a lot of time and responsibility? or do you get an agent and try to find a publisher? So it's a whole other thing besides writing, but it's fun. As with my memoir, the part of the fun was just the journey of meeting people and trying to get things published. And when I was yearly, most people don't know this, but there is what is called the Arab Conference at Harvard each spring, and which is an amazing conference. And people come from not only all over the country, but all over the world to this conference. And I had a stand where I was showing the things I had written, and what we call the dummy or the mock version of this children's book was the one that caught most people's attention. So I'm hoping I can get it out there. And the idea I had when I had last visited Lebanon, I was on the balcony of the house, and I turned to go inside the salon, and I was disoriented for a minute. And I thought, wait a minute, I felt like I should have been in the living room in the US. So, and I've talked to other people who have that, who have a foot in each country, who get a little bit disoriented. And so I thought, what if this was a child and they have family in two places, in Boston and in Beirut, and they want to be able to be in both places. So they invent their own house. So, the Beirut Boston house, there's a room that's, where they sit with Teta and eat neish next to the gardenia bush. And then they go out to play in the backyard in Boston where it's snowing. So that's my idea.
Right. That's a great idea, because I think a lot of people that actually struggle with this thing, like where am I from? Where should I be today? Stuff like that. So if you were to write the next chapter of your memoir, what would its title be?
The title, I think it would be Home is Where the Heart Is. That's an old expression, or maybe home is where the mind and the heart and the spirit are. Other people, I'm sure, have had this experience. And again, I have to say how lucky I feel that when my sons came here, I had the ability to do that. I had the opportunity and the means to do that, where so many people are living in really difficult situations and they're not able to be mobile. So whereas I feel bad and sometimes resentful that these crises occur and I had to pick up and leave, I also feel lucky that I'm able to move and be with my family. But I've had this experience a lot here where, I'm reaching for this particular porcelain dish in the cabinet, and I realized, no, that cabinet is in my house in Lebanon. So you have these funny experiences. You can't say that the physical things mean nothing. I mean, they are all associated with memories, the photo albums, the music, my old piano, but it's not the only thing. It's not the most important thing. It's, being in a place where you feel secure and a place where you can be close to your family. So wherever that will be.
Exactly. I mean, as you said, physical things are important, but memories are also important. They're part of what made you the person you are right now.
Right.
So what advice would you give to anyone navigating big life transitions, since you've done it before? Moving countries, redefining purpose.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, my hat's off to a lot of our students and residents who do this, and many of them just on their own, and they have the strength to do that and to adapt, which is really something. But if you, as you mentioned, it's the purpose. It sounds funny, but in a way, when I moved to Lebanon, it wasn't hard. It was, I think you had mentioned me a question about what kept me grounded, but we didn't really feel tied to the ground. It was more uplifting. It was, we were carrying on this mission and this dream of my late husband that also belonged to all of us. And ironically, sometimes when you have a crisis, and then what your purpose is. I've got to focus on that. And all the little things sort of fall away. Or if you're a parent, you have to take care of children. That's your purpose. It's very clear. And sometimes when you don't feel you have that immediate responsibility, it's a little bit harder to say, what is my purpose? What is my goal? And when I came to the US 2 years ago, it was funny, I'm a graduate of Johns Hopkins, and they were advertising this free life design course. And I couldn't take it from Lebanon. It was remote, but it was going to be like 2 or 3 in the morning. So as soon as I got here, I was able to take the course. And that was really helpful, helping me frame things. You don't necessarily find that one answer, but it helps you to think, okay, in the next 5 years, what do I want to, where do I want to be? Not just work, but where you are, what you want to do. And it's not by sitting around dreaming that you find the purpose. It's by doing things that you find the purpose. And I've given like career talks to high school students in Lebanon and college students. And what a lot of researchers say, and I think a lot of wise people say, is that if you want to have a happy life, not like a, la-di-da, carefree, but a deeply happy, satisfying, stable life, is if you have a purpose, if you have something that you're passionate about, and you have the opportunity to work on that. Whether you succeed in it, you have the opportunity to work on it. And it can't be just anything. It should be a thing that you perceive that helps other people. And if that's a really good concept to have as you're looking for your work and your life and what you want to proceed in doing.
Right. I think that's an important part. I think just wherever you are, wherever you end up, you need to make sure you have purpose, and you make sure you like you said, like you are potentially thinking like, all right, I'm here in Boston. I was able to make it to Boston. You don't say, oh my God, I don't know, I should have stayed in Lebanon. It's like bad things happen there, but you made it to Boston and you're making the best out of it actually, and you're enjoying your life there. So what is the one thing you hope listeners carry with them after hearing the story? This is to conclude. I think we can keep talking for a long time with you, Nancy. You have a lot of stories to tell us, but
Right.
finally, what is the one thing you hope listeners carry with them after hearing your story?
Yeah. And, besides what I just said about finding purpose and something that helps people and you can feel committed to, is be true to yourself. Now, try to find what is your nature and what you will do best with. The typical story, sort of American dream or Lebanese dream, is you find a thing that you're interested in. And typically it might be doctor, lawyer, engineer. And you get into that and you get in at the ground level and you move up the ladder and you stay in that one thing your whole life. And probably you be successful and earn a good living and all that. And we all have to earn a living. But I've decided that is not the best path for everyone. For me, it obviously wasn't. I should have figured out when I was in college that my senior year, I was getting credit for research in cell biology. I was studying Italian, and I was getting academic credit for piano performance. And that mix was ideal. I was very happy. And so I don't think I'd be happy doing just one thing. And so if you find, I feel there are always practical matters we have to think about, but it's try to figure out what your nature is and what's the best way for you. And I do think that if you are able to study the humanities or any other subject outside of your one profession, it will probably enrich your life and make life more beautiful and interesting for you, and you will be able to find other ways to connect to other people. And that's, I think, a recipe for being happy.
Right. Nancy, it was great talking to you. And I think just in summary, I think your story actually embodies like someone who was able, and I think a lot of people would be scared to do what you've done, but your story tells people that, change is hard, but it can happen. You can make the best out of it and enjoy life and keep going. I think this is a great story, and it was great talking to you today on the podcast.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. All right. So let's pause.